Welcome back to the On Adventure podcast. I'm Josh Self, and I'll be your host today. My guest today is a friend that I have known for many years. His name is Matt Miner. Matt and I first met several years ago and spent a lot of hours running trails with headlamps on our heads, very, very early hours of the morning, and got to know each other while we were really trying to stay in shape. Fast forward a few years, Matt had a big life transition with his employment, and I had an opportunity within our wealth management firm that it was a great fit for Matt to come join us and worked with us for several years, until at one point he decided to take on another adventure of a different kind and launching his own firm. And so now I consider Matt a colleague with a very similar and fast-growing wealth management firm. I really enjoyed this conversation where we got to dive into the details of what adventure means to Matt. And as you'll find out, and probably have heard through many other conversations that I've had, adventure looks very different depending on which everyday explorer you're talking to. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Matt Miner. All right, Matt Miner, you are back in the conference room that you've spent many hours sitting in. We'll talk about that a little bit, I'm sure. But welcome to the On Adventure podcast.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Josh.
Yeah. And you do 100% have the best radio voice of anybody I've ever known. So
now I feel like the pressure's on.
So as we were just talking about, you and I have known each other for a while, and we worked together for a bit, and now you've launched and running your own wealth management firm. And I do want to talk about that, but the arc of these conversations with On Adventure is about where adventure plays out in our lives. Why do we do hard things by choice? Sometimes not by choice, but many times by choice. And what do you learn when you do it? So let's start back from the beginning, and we'll start off by, for folks listening, who are you? A little bit about yourself, and where did you start life?
Well, Josh, it's great to have a chance to tell that story again, and we'll try to keep it short and interesting for your listeners. So started out life in the west side of this country in Seattle, Washington. My family had been there for about 5 generations. Still have an old homestead out there that's kind of very important to me, especially in growing up, and was sort of my first exposure, I guess you'd say, to like outdoor adventure. Definitely shaped my love for things like being in the mountains. And from there, when I was 15, my parents ended their business in Seattle and moved to Tucson, Arizona, where they built a bed and breakfast. My dad was an architect and a builder, and so they bought land and put up a 6,000 square foot house. That's the Jeremiah Inn. And
what kind of business did they have in Seattle?
My dad was a designer and builder of homes and big remodels.
Really? Okay. Closed that down and moved to Tucson.
Moved to Tucson. They wanted to try a different climate, which for anyone who's visited, Tucson is different than Seattle.
And you were how old?
I was 15.
15. How hard was that on you?
That was a challenging move, and one that I would not have chosen, and would not, even though, it shaped the course of my life from there, would not willingly put my kids through a move at age 15. But that's the way it goes.
What was hard about it? Just
leaving friends behind.
And you had been there your entire life, so it was like these were long-term good friends that you left back.
Yeah, and that was another thing that I do reflect on is I don't think that my parents appreciated the value of the social capital that they had in Seattle for having been there since pioneer days. That you cannot just move to a new place, have 5 generations worth of connections, even in 20 years. So my parents are very sociable, make friends easily. They've made good friends. They're well connected there. They've had a successful business, but it's just different when people knew you from when you were a baby.
Is the social environment different in Tucson than Seattle?
Yeah, but they're both, yes. I mean, you could think of, if you've been to the Pacific Northwest, that has sort of its own ethos. And then Tucson, instead of spring break, they give you rodeo days. Okay. So historically, just a different makeup of those two places.
So you were what grade though?
Yeah, it was 9th grade. So I had my 4 years of high school in Tucson. And, in terms of shaping my life, I met my wife there our senior year in high school. And so that was obviously a big determiner of the future trajectory. And also Tucson was where I took up hunting and archery and got much more into just like independent backpacking and camping, starting at about 16.
Was that with like Boy Scouts or just on your own?
No, it was just on my own with my hunting mentor, Rick Cortese, and a particular friend, Andy Harris. And we did a lot of that, including taking 2 weeks off during our senior year in high school to go archery elk hunting.
Oh my gosh.
It was a lot better than school.
Yeah.
Anyway, we ended up from there completing undergrad at Arizona State and got married during that undergraduate career, and then began my work life sort of unadventurously with Intel Corporation and corporate finance, helping them decide how much money to spend on tooling for their fabrication plants. And going through that for a while, I noticed there were these, general manager decision makers, and I was advising them on the financial impacts of the decisions that they were making. And I thought I really would rather be the one making the decisions than offering the advice to the general managers. And I thought the sure ticket for that for me was to go back to business school. So in 2007, we made our first foray into the great state of North Carolina, and did my MBA at Duke in the full-time program there. And then started a career with John Deere, the tractor manufacturer. I moved around a number of times and had some really terrific corporate experiences with them. And then we had always said that if we got the chance, we would step off the corporate relocation train in either Raleigh or Tucson. And in 2013, got recruited to an executive job with a local dealership here, 14 locations in central North Carolina, and was with that firm from 13 to 18. And through that time, what was happening, I came out of business school with like $225,000 in total student loan debt. So that was a big factor in our family's financial plan. And in 2010, some cousins who are close friends gave us Dave Ramsey's Total Money Makeover book. And we're like, we wonder if you'd be interested in what this guy has to say. And from 2010 to 14, we got very serious in our family about paying off debt, and paid off that $225,000 in debt, and then started saving and investing and paid off the house, and then started blogging about personal finance. And that was where I think led to the conversation that you and I first had. I think it was in spring of 2017. You were still commuting from Tennessee at that time. And from writing about personal finance, I thought it would be a lot more engaging to work directly with clients on their financial plans. And you were good enough to give me an opportunity to get started with then PLC Wealth Management in 2018. So that's from there, I guess. I've been talking a long time. Was really appreciated the 3 years that you and Mike and I had together, and learned so much about this craft from you guys and about dealing with clients. And then in 2021, I always tell people we had a very amicable breakup where about 24 clients from PLC Wealth Management came over to Minor Wealth Management, and we've been serving those clients along with some others for the last 2.5 years. And it's been a lot of hard work, but it's been wonderful as well.
Before you went to Duke, how many other places were you looking at for MBA program?
I was looking at 3, and the other 2 made it easy for me by not accepting me. So I applied
You got into Duke and you didn't get into somewhere else.
I applied to Duke, Dartmouth, and Stanford.
Well, you set a high bar. That is...
Managed to pull the wool over the eyes of one.
I don't think they regret it. Although, I still am surprised that we can be friends with your blood being so dark in the blue and mine being light.
Well, it helps that your guys have been having a real good run in general for the last couple of years when it comes to competing with the school up the road in Durham. And then I think the fact that I went to Duke for business school rather than undergrad, maybe.
You're a little less rabid than some of the fans?
Yeah.
Well, that's fair enough. So Seattle to Tucson and then Tucson to Durham, North Carolina, that's a big jump. Was that an easy transition for you, or was it a big culture shock?
I mean, moving to the Southeast has been a great place for us. I don't think that was ever a particularly hard move. We tend to make close friends wherever we go, and so we really missed our community of friends in Phoenix. It was a big deal to say goodbye, especially to our church there. But we've had a great time in the Southeast, and we've moved back here, twice. So for 3 total moves to the Raleigh area, and we're pretty settled here at this point.
I gotcha. So the career changes, obviously, there's some practical sides to that, why you made those changes. What for you was some of the biggest hurdles to shifting from Deere to a more local job and then leaving that industry altogether to come into wealth management?
Yeah, so I've always thought a ton about career, and we try to plan these things out as best you can. And as my life illustrates, you never know how it's going to go. In leaving the big corporate job that was kind of the post-MBA goal to take the job with a smaller company here, that was really about getting back control over our address. And, in any type of job, you're trading something off against something else. And Deere is a great place to work. A lot of career potential there, pretty reasonable, like company culture, not destructive. But at the same time, if Deere says, hey, there's an opportunity in Ottumwa, you just got to go. And you can say no once and probably stay with the company. If you say no twice, you probably need to leave.
That's it.
And if you say no once, it's probably going to slow down your progression for the rest of your career. And so that's just a lot to trade away. So we sort of achieved that address stability in Raleigh in 2013, but that work with that dealership was a pretty challenging cultural fit for me. And then the other thing that was going on there was the agricultural equipment industry went through probably the biggest downturn since the mid-1980s through that period. And so I presided over 5 years of shrinking sales, and it does not help to tell the owners that the sales are shrinking less than pure dealerships, because what they want is sales growth. And so that was a difficult time to be in that particular industry. And I think it would have been really interesting had I taken that job. The 5 years before had been probably the biggest boom since the late 1970s.
What changed? Because that wasn't the Great Recession.
No, and ag industry tends to be pretty countercyclical to the consumer industry. And so that was, for example, why when coming out of business school in 2009, I had great opportunities at Deere when the whole rest of the U.S. economy was in the dumps. The reason why at that time were commodity prices came way down, so farm incomes came way down. And then what happens at the dealership level is you own inventory, and kind of like houses were being revalued from 2008 to 2010. You trade for a tractor on a Thursday and put $230,000 into it, and then the following Thursday it's worth $210,000. And so you're going through this balance sheet pain that you have to then filter through the P&L.
Those are really giant hurdles to not only want to do, but then to pull that off. Had you paid the debt off?
Yeah, we paid the debt off in 2014, and we paid the house off while I was working with you.
Do you think you could have done the career things that you've done if that wasn't the case?
I think I could have done them better if I hadn't had as much debt in the first place. But definitely clearing that outstanding debt was freed us up a lot in our thinking.
So along those lines, though, how would you have done it differently?
Yeah, I wouldn't have changed what we did. I maybe would have been a little bit less extravagant in my tastes during business school. I think so. That would have been a marginal $20,000 to $40,000 that I think I probably could have saved.
But taking on the debt to put yourself through MBA, kind of an inevitability for what you needed to get done.
Yeah, that was, I had always, I guess you could say it had been my dream to go and do that. The people that I knew and admired, whose careers I wanted to emulate, were the people that I was interested in were in business, and the people that I saw in business who I particularly respected. And this is like kind of looking at corporate work more than like what we do as wealth managers here, but typically had their MBAs from selective schools.
Going back to your early days, we blew right past this, but you said you really got into getting outside while you're in Tucson, hunting, backpacking. How old were you when you really started getting into that? Just a quick interruption here to say that if you're enjoying these conversations, jump over to my website, www.ridgelinewealthadvisors.com, and that's advisors with an ORS, and there you can sign up for my monthly newsletter, The Money Trail Guide. You'll find more information in line with how you can pursue your great adventure now and all the things that go into planning and funding something like that. With that, let's jump back into the conversation.
So in Seattle, my outdoor interest had especially been fishing, but when we moved to the desert, not as many fish. So I started learning about hunting, and really just was reading about it, which has always been how I learned about things. And one of my neighbors, I don't know if he saw me shooting with my bow or if my parents talked to him about it, and he just took me under his wing and started teaching me.
So hunting was not something your dad passed down to you. It was your interest.
No.
You found a way to figure it out, and your neighbor became kind of a mentor in that.
He was a mentor, and that's been a lifelong thing. And now in my family, all of my kids have interest in hunting to differing degrees, and that's been great. We love that.
What was it about hunting that captured your interest? If it wasn't, like a family legacy.
Yeah, I think it was just a way to be outside and a skill. And then as I got into it, it took me a long time to have much in the way of success. But as we've become more successful over the years, it's gotten where, being successful in a hunt is always a real thrill. And then we love like processing the animals, and we love eating the animals. It's always fun to serve venison to unsuspecting guests. And this is delicious.
That's not very nice.
You're eating a deer. So that's just something that I've enjoyed over, I guess now nearly 30 years.
But it's the being outside part that is maybe more of the driving force.
As opposed to the pursuing the animals, I think it's both. I feel like hunting is a cool hobby that puts together a bunch of different skills, like meat processing. We just came back from my coffee cup here says Winter Camp 2024. We did a butchery and cooking class at this camp that I just led. Gosh. And so I don't know, it's fun.
Not for everybody.
Not for everybody, but there was a high level of interest.
Now, what kind of backpacking did you do as a kid?
So that was with Boy Scouts, and those were in typically the Catalina and the Santa Rita Mountains in Tucson, and they were usually through hikes of some kind, ranging from 10 to 30 miles. And we were just in Arizona, where it is so dry. Usually, what you're doing is seeking out water with your backpacking, and so you're going from a point to a point that has water. And typically that's, it's both beautiful. Maybe you can go swimming. You can also, pump your water filter and replenish your bottles.
How many years did you do that?
That was mostly just in high school. I don't think I've backpacked since high school, except that now I am planning a backpack for May of this year, which will be the first time in a while. I think we're going to go on a section of the AT in Central Virginia. Do
you know trailheads or areas?
I'm not ready to answer that just now. Sorry, Josh. I'm in the early research phase.
I have plenty of resources for you.
Good.
Whether it be sections that I've done or what I've heard other people talk about. Yeah. But you picked a good place to start. The Virginia sections. In fact, I interviewed a guy this week that thru-hiked the AT, and he said Virginia was his favorite state of all the sections. And it's the views and the mountains and the trail itself are very, very diverse through the state of Virginia. So
I'm sorry I didn't bring my backpacking notes. So I shouldn't have brought it up if I wasn't ready to talk about it. But
gotta be ready.
Got to be ready. But I referenced this winter camp, and so like this love for the outdoors and teaching others about the outdoors. This was just the 8th year that our church has organized a winter camp, and we had 124 campers and 26 adult volunteers at that event.
That's a big group.
It's a big group. And then this backpack is going to be an invitation to winter camp alumni, because winter camp ends at 12th grade. And so it's like, what can we do that'll be the next thing to keep, just to keep what's been a great group together.
How many do you think you'll end up taking on the backpack?
Well, I think we're going to limit it to something like 4. I mean, these are adults. Nobody's going to be going who's not 18, but there's going to be 4 like real adults, and then maybe 12 to 14 kids. The sort of vision for this is 2 nights on the trail and then a 3rd night at an Airbnb with a hot tub.
Something to look forward to after a couple hard days. Well, that's actually a really cool idea. I've noticed with you that you do like being outside. You find ways to do that, whether it's hunting, backpacking, running, working outside. But you always seem to merge that with people. And I know you to be pretty extroverted, kind of the yin to my yang, because I'm on the other end of the spectrum. But do you think, is that intentional? I guess is where my question's coming from.
Yeah, I would say for our family, it's always people first. And in a lot of ways, that's how we ended up in Raleigh. Not that we don't love our family who's out west. We love them very much. But just that, the people that our lives were sort of built around ended up being here. And so that's why we're here, for example, rather than in someplace else. And
yeah, and that's an intentional choice. I think it also can have a tendency to be an inherited choice also, meaning that, and maybe I'll ask this as a question, is the people focus and the social part of your personality and things that you drive for, do you feel like that was passed down from generations within your family, or is that uniquely Matt?
No, I think that at least of the family members that I know, specifically my paternal grandparents and my parents, they would share that approach. And we all have different personalities. But yeah, I think thinking in terms of how do we integrate people with this? For my parents, obviously they started a hospitality business, but they would also do things like on holidays, they'd have people who didn't have family in the area over to our family dinner, or just, when we planned New Year's gatherings, there were particular groups of friends that we always did that with. And anyway,
moving in high school, going to college, finding an MBA program on the exact opposite side of the country, changing jobs and then changing careers. I guess what I'd like for you to do is talk about how have you prepared for those challenges? And do you see them as choices you had agency over, or do you see them as things that you had to deal with and maybe by choice you wouldn't have done that?
I think they were choices I had agency over in the sense that could have made some other choice. But I think that it hasn't always gone easily. I graduated into, Charity and I joke that if I'm graduating from something or starting something new, it's probably going to be some kind of national catastrophe. Because when I graduated in 2002, that was the tech downturn that was part of the recession that went on at that time. Intel initially rescinded my offer and then came back with it again. And so that was like an initial thing that happened, right? 2009 was probably the second worst year to graduate from business school. 2010 was harder. Companies just weren't hiring. The fact that the company that I preferred to work for was hiring was a blessing. And the fact that, like I said earlier, they were kind of counter-cyclical. The change to wealth management in 2018, I don't know whether that would have come about in exactly that way, at least not at that time. Quality Equipment at that time went through a change of control transaction, and one of the new partners was interested in the job that I had. And so that was the catalyst of the timing to transition to wealth management, except that I'd had my eye on it, or had been wrestling with what I would like to do there, for a long time. As far as what enables it, I think for us, it's been always asking the question, why we're doing what we're doing at any particular moment, and is there a way to do that better? And then just on the financial planning side of things, I know that you do this really well as well, is just structuring your life so that you have margin, so that if you have to make a change, you're not backed into a corner, and maybe you can make the change that you'd prefer, rather than a change that you're somehow compelled to make. But, I don't know. I think that the idea of, for most people, right, most people don't just settle into a post-collegiate job and work their way up through that. That's extremely rare in our generation, even let alone the ones that have come after. So I feel like we're all making changes all the time. Mine have just sometimes been maybe a little less linear.
Do you have a process that you go through for yourself to physically, emotionally prepare for what you know to be a hard time that's coming?
I write a lot of notes. I do a fair amount of journaling. If we're considering alternatives side by side, I may just make a kind of a pluses and minuses list, not dissimilar to stuff that we use with clients to help them make choices about one thing or another. And, at this point, I don't see those type of changes that I've done over the last 10 years on the horizon in the next 10 years. But I also know that, right, it's called, the end of history illusion, that if you want to know how much change is going to come your way over the next decade, take a look at the last decade. And when I do that, it's like, whoa, maybe I would expect maybe the amount of change will be similar, but maybe it's coming in different domains as my children get ready to leave the house and as our parents get older and things like that happening.
So what is it about journaling that specifically for you that is a helpful coping mechanism?
Yeah, it's cheaper than therapy, which as a new business owner, you got to keep the costs down. I think I use that to reflect on what's on my mind at that moment. And so if you go back and read old journals, sometimes you see that you're just constantly worrying about the same things, and that might give you some clues.
Do you do that? Do you go back and read old journals?
From time to time. And then the other thing that I think is really important there is to not only have to-do lists, of which I have many in various formats, but also to have, lists of things that you've accomplished, and to say, hey, yes, I have this ever expanding list of things that I need to do, but I have in fact done some things. And so I typically at the end of the day will try to reflect on one or two things that were meaningful that got done that day. And I think that that's helpful.
That's really good. Did you come up with that yourself, or is that?
No, that was it's probably in various places. The one that I'm thinking about is it Benjamin Hardy and Dan Sullivan, who do Strategic Coach, and I don't remember which book it is, but it's his concept of always measure backwards. And so he specifically recommends at the end of the day before sleep to consider what you got done that day that was meaningful, and then to also briefly consider what you think you'd like to get done tomorrow, knowing that plans may deviate, but to think on those things, both the positive accomplishment of the day that's gone, as well as what you foresee as being important for tomorrow, and to do that in the hour or two before bedtime.
Yeah, I've heard that suggested in a variety of different formats, whether it's having a gratitude list at the end of the day, or as you just described it, thinking about the things you did accomplish. And I wonder what it is. This is more like a philosophical question, but that late day framing of the positive maybe has a way of helping tilt the balance a little bit away from what is naturally a negativity bias within the human brain. And as you said in your journal, is writing down things that consistently you worry about, to have that offset with the things that you actually were able to accomplish, or good things that happened around your life. Do you think you sleep a little bit better at night, or does it just is it a nice dot at the end of the day?
I think that's the idea. I can't really say what my results have been.
Okay. Very good. Okay. So now that you've launched into this new venture with your career, what do you just mentioned it a minute ago, the next 10 years, if you had to guess, and certainly you don't want to repeat everything that you did in the last 10 years, but what do you see coming on the horizon, other than you've mentioned kids grown up and out of the house? What challenges are you preparing yourself for?
So I think a lot about this in terms of the business and getting that to a place where I feel like, so there's a very specific goal right now. My colleague, Joe Bray, works 2 days per week, and I would like to be able to have him working 5 days per week. And that's tied to revenue. So, right, we have growth targets related to that are very concrete. And I think that will come about in 2024. So that's pretty near term. Going beyond that, I think throughout my entire working career, which, is now two plus decades, Charity, my wife, has been very supportive of all of my endeavors, thinking in terms of how I can be supportive of her as she considers what her life looks like as her homeschool mom career comes to a conclusion. And so that's very much on our minds. I think beyond that, we've got, like a lot of people, right, probably some travel goals, some things we'd like to do with the house. Not very exciting stuff. I say to my brother a lot of times that it seems like we spend a lot of time doing stuff that's not very newsworthy, but is good.
Such is life.
Yeah.
I do like to get at, with these questions, what have you learned about yourself? So we've spent most of this time talking about the challenges that you went into or that were thrust upon you. I would say you've succeeded in all of them. I can't think of an example where you fell flat on your face. But from Matt as a teenager that was forced to move to Tucson to Matt in his 40s now that is running a very thoughtful and well-run wealth management business on his own, what have you learned about yourself along that way?
Maybe this is easy to learn because it's one of the few that I would go back and do differently if I could. I think that the lack of cultural fit between me and the dealership was apparent to me, initially apparent within months and very apparent within a year or two. And because I did not have, we've talked about all these changes, right? But I did not have a clear direction that I was moving toward at that moment other than what I was doing, because I'd had a vision for how that job was going to go. It wasn't going that way. And I think that was clear by the time my formal employment agreement expired with them after about 18 months. And so I wish that maybe I had engaged a coach or somebody at that time to help me think through what the options were and not stayed another 3.5 years. I think that would have been probably better for me and probably better for the business. So like once you've identified that a situation needs to change, staying in it just compounds the pain. So that would be one thing that I would reflect on over that period of time. Something else I reflect on a lot is that what you think you want through your 20s is probably going to look different in your 30s and perhaps again look different in your 40s. I was very career oriented in my 20s and, still continue to want to have and do great work. But when I was about in my early 30s, a particular mentor said to me, like, if you're going to have much in the way of impact, it's going to be in your family first and then in your church. And then whatever you might do in the world after that is a distant third compared to what you can do in your family and your church. And so I would say, took that to heart. That became part of the decision even to move to Raleigh in 2013 and sort of give up on the dream of the big career with the big company. And then in really focusing on the things where Charity and I together can have a meaningful impact. That has been especially in raising our children and shaping their education, and then in doing things that support our local church and our close community there. So that was something that I think about along those lines as well.
That's interesting, because I think that's how I would describe you, as somebody that is focused on their family and spends, comparatively to most other folks, an extensive amount of time with your church family and pouring in hours and physical labor and energy into that. So you're not just saying that. I'm reflecting back to you that I see that's how you live your life. And I would guess that it's a satisfying way for you to do so.
Yeah. No, thanks for saying that, Josh. I appreciate that. The answer to that is yes, right? And then yet at the same time, we live in this world with a lot of problems and things like that. And so you make these choices about how you spend your time, and then you sometimes unproductively, right, reflect on what you give up in order to do something else. So we all just do the best we can.
We've talked a little bit about your kids, and your kids are the same ballpark age as my kids. What of Matt's, history on planet Earth so far, what are some of the things that you hope through these different life challenges and things that you've faced? What are some of the things that you hope your kids take away from that and becomes part of your legacy to the next generation?
Charity and I say all the time that like our kids are so much better than we were at their age. Like they have better work ethic. They relate well to people. I mean, not that we were horrible at these things, but we marvel at them, as I know you do at your own kids. I hear you talk about them. So I would hope that from me, I mean, I guess we've talked around this. I just would say I would hope that my children love the Lord Jesus Christ and serve him in the church. That would be my biggest hope for them. Following that, we are trying hard to teach them things about, for lack of a better term, like self-sufficiency and entrepreneurship. One of the things that I see as I look around at parents, if you think that a child ought to be ready to go and essentially live independently at age 18, you have to set them up on a glide path approaching that, where when it comes time for them to go off to school or to go get a full-time job, that there's not a big difference from both an independence and a responsibility standpoint when you give that final push out of the nest. And so we spend a lot of time working with them on very practical stuff, like how to do banking and how to follow up with people and how to send thank you notes. And I mean, just the nuts and bolts of, what we see as living well in the world. So yeah, those would be the things. I'm sure that there's a lot more. We hope that they'll live close by us. We encourage them to think about that.
Well, you've got some great kids, and I think as the things that the kids learn from us usually is more caught than taught, meaning
it's fearful.
Yeah, they see what we do, they see how we do things, and that usually resonates more, sticks more than maybe the words that we would say to them. I think you're doing a lot of things right in getting your kids ready to fly the nest, and not just fly the nest and follow your ground, but like to be ready to fly and I'm sure you'd love for them to be down the street, but if they fly a little bit further away and do it on their own, you'd probably be happy for that too.
Of course.
Yeah. So I think that's a good place to put a bow on it. And I think it will be very well, the thread through this conversation, I think will be very obvious that you've gone to the next thing, meaning as circumstances changed, whether you intended for them or not, starting with leaving Seattle and going to Tucson, all the way to business school and jobs after that. You've taken the hits and you got back up. And I think that's a theme. If I could put a theme on your life story, it's that you've taken the punches along the way and you got up and went on to the next thing. I think I asked this a minute ago, and you can tell me if I'm off on this, but every time it happens, it hurts or it sucks. But the more it happens, the more confidence in yourself and your abilities that come. Has that been true for you?
I mean, maybe so. I think that nobody gets to be even in their mid-40s without taking some hits. I mean, you know this as well as anybody. What I was thinking as you shared that, I think, without disagreeing with what you said, I think the way I would positively frame what we've tried to do is to know what our values are in advance. And those are somewhat unchanging over time. The implementation of them does seem to change over time, what that looks like. But if you know what your values are, then the decisions are relatively easy. I think you and I both probably a lot of times tell clients, if you know what the money is for, figuring out which investment it should be in is relatively easy. And so in a similar way, if you know what you want out of life, then you can take the steps that imperfectly move you towards what you want rather than wanting what somebody else wants for you or not knowing what you want at all. So that, I think that would be the through line that I would see for us. And you follow those values, and sometimes it goes well, sometimes it doesn't go well, but your decision-making criteria is clear.
Yeah, love that. All right, Matt. Well, I appreciate your time. This has been fun.
Honored to be on the On Adventure podcast. Thank you, Josh.
Okay. Man, I really enjoyed that. I hope you did as well. The next one will be coming at you in a couple weeks, so stay tuned. Until then, I hope you have your own great adventure.